Let's begin with a word of prayer, shall we? Lord, we gather this night to look at someone whose mission was to proclaim your word. We ask that you would make us faithful to that mission. Be the center of all our discussions, guide what we are about, and finally lead us on to you. For in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, again, it's good to have you here. I'm Mark Brayton, a pastor here at Our Saviors. I guess I'll start by confessing I've had a lifelong fascination with Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A fascinating individual. What has intrigued me is that the last few years it seems like Tyler has discovered Bonhoeffer. There are newspaper articles about Bonhoeffer. There's a bestseller out about him. Numerous people around Tyler have discovered Bonhoeffer, but most of the attention has been on his life. And it is a fascinating life. I mean, it was a very faithful life, absolutely fascinating life. I find his thought just as fascinating. What he had to teach was also fascinating. So what I'm hoping we can do in these sessions is both. I'm going to start tonight by looking at the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We'll run you through his 39 years on this earth. And then the last 4 weeks we'll do some of his life and more of what he had to teach. Some of his teaching will be very basic, the centrality of Christ, the importance of the Word of God. Some of that will come very naturally. Some of his stuff will probably make you a little nervous. You start talking about a world come of age or religionless Christianity, we may be scratching our heads and kind of wondering where he's heading. But that's part of the fun of Bonhoeffer. So the other thing I should say is anytime I teach a class, my rule is please interrupt me and ask questions. I teach 7th and 8th graders in confirmation, and they tell me that I get more interesting when I get off the track. I'm never quite sure what that means about my teaching technique, but it does mean as questions come up, or if as you have things you want to dialogue about, please bring them up. Especially as we get into some of the concepts and some of the things he's teaching. I suspect there's going to be people, I agree with this, I don't agree with that, and that would be most fun. The other thing I think I'm going to do, we're shooting for 5 weeks. So tonight week's 1. Next week will be week number 2, 7 o'clock. I think next week I'm also going to start at 6 with tonight's material over again. I know of a number of families from the congregation that couldn't be here tonight, and my wife couldn't be here tonight, and she told me I had to do it again. So I think you go right to the top.
No, thank you.
Yeah, there's certain things you have to. So next week at 6, I'm going to go through this presentation again. So if anybody have missed it, tell them to come an hour earlier than at 7 o'clock. We'll move into the news now. With that, let's move into Dietrich Bonhoeffer. The dates for Bonhoeffer are 1906 to 1945. 39 years old when he dies. Short life. That is probably the most famous picture of Bonhoeffer. There are some. Bonhoeffer did not particularly like getting his picture taken, and so we don't have as many pictures of him as we probably would like to. This was taken in 1939, so it's about 6 years before his death. Very common picture of Bonhoeffer. It's always intrigued me. He looks a little pudgy in the picture. And everything I read says no, he's actually a very athletic individual. Fairly rugged, athletic build. When he was running the illegal seminary at Finkenwald, he was playing soccer with the students. So I've never quite figured out, that picture always looked a little German didn't, yeah. The other, if you want some German background, there is Bonhoeffer as a younger man. And he's definitely got the thinner, more athletic build there. But he's got that intensity. It's like, whoa, I'm going to tell you something and you will listen. Bonhoeffer's life. He's born February 4th, 1906. He is the 6th of 8 children. Actually has a twin sister, Sabine. Strong family, very, very, very important family in Germany. The parents were Karl and Bonhoeffer. Karl and Paula Bonhoeffer. Karl was the top neurologist and psychiatrist in Germany at the time. Leading medical doctor, leading psychiatrist. When Dietrich was 6, they moved to Berlin, and he took over as chair of psychiatry at the University of Berlin. So a very, very important figure in German medical things. Paula was a well-educated woman, one of the few at the time to have a college degree. Not a real religious family. Paula was quite pietistic. And in her family, there were some pastors and some theologians, and a deep, deep piety which she shared and taught with the kids. Carl was a scientist and not a man of faith. We've never quite figured out if Carl approved of Dietrich's choice to become a pastor and a theologian. Certainly wasn't overly supportive of it. The family did not attend church regularly. They did say prayers around the meals. Mom Bonhoeffer made a point of teaching kids Bible stories. They sang a lot of hymns together, very musical family. They went to confirmation, some of those kind of things. But family itself was kind of mixed as to Dietrich's decision to go into theology. In fact, one of his brothers, I believe it was Carl, older brother, was a quite renowned physicist. And at one point, Carl told Dietrich that if he would drop theology, he would drop physics. So they weren't real supportive of him going into theology. He did anyway. Age 6, they moved to Berlin. Carl Bonhoeffer becomes the chair for the psychiatry at the University of Berlin. A very comfortable, privileged aristocratic upbringing. They're wealthy. You get kind of that European old-style aristocrat, very, very educated, upper crust. Very much that. Very strong family unit. Family worked very, very hard to be a family together. In 1923, he would have been 16 or 17 years old. He begins his university studies, his theological studies. First year, he goes to Tübingen University. After a year, he transfers to the University of Berlin. This is the height of a movement called German liberalism. It's an interesting approach to theology. We're going to get into that quite a bit next week. Bonhoeffer is raised in the great tradition of German liberal theology. He is also one who is very important in shooting down German liberal theology. He really doesn't think a whole lot of it, but he's raised in that, and it does influence him. As a 17-year-old, he and his brother Klaus visit Rome, fascinated by Rome, fascinated by the Catholic Church. And in 1927, he is 21 years old, and he finishes his doctorate. That's just kind of disgusting, isn't it? Yeah, 21, finishes his doctorate. It is published as Sactorum Communio, the Communion of Saints, the study of the Church and Church and sociology. But at age 21, his dissertation is accepted, and he is Dr. Bonhoeffer and is published. In a little bit after that, he serves as an intern for a German congregation in Barcelona, Spain. He is in the process of being trained for the ministry. As part of that, he's an intern or a student pastor. As far as we can tell, did a very nice job. Very well thought of by the congregation, got along very well with the congregation, although there were comments that his sermons were over their heads. I think he was more the professor type than the pastoral type. Big event in his life. 1930 and 31, he comes to this country and studies at Union Seminary in New York. He's awarded a fellowship, comes over and spends just over a year studying here, makes a lot of connections, meets a lot of people, thoroughly enjoys his studies here. He is not real impressed with American theology. He thinks we're a little weak at it. And Union Seminary was the hotbed of liberal theology in this country. And Bonhoeffer was not particularly impressed with that. So he has some good theological arguments, but outstanding student, and thoroughly enjoys his time here. One of the connections he does make, one of his friends is a black student who introduces Bonhoeffer to Harlem. And Bonhoeffer falls in love with Harlem. Doesn't like a lot of the preaching he's getting in the white churches, but he goes to Harlem and loves that style of worship, loves the sermons he hears. Spends a lot of time in Harlem, is totally enamored by spirituals. And so he carries that back to Germany with him. Bonhoeffer was also a very astute musician. In fact, early on, he wasn't sure if he was going to go into theology or music. Very, very good musician. This is his introduction to black spirituals, loves them, carries them back to Germany. Later on, when he's running an illegal seminary in Nazi Germany, they're singing spirituals from this country. Travels around quite a bit here. Travels the country, goes to Cuba, goes to Mexico. It's kind of an adventurous sort. Kind of one that always needed to check out what was next. 1931, returns to Germany and becomes a lecturer in theology at the University of Berlin. Now, in our modern days, in our system, it's kind of a glorified teaching assistant. Okay, he doesn't get to be a full professor yet. I mean, he's still, what is it? He's not even in his 30s yet. So he's still a young man. He basically begins as a teaching assistant and begins giving lectures in theology there in Berlin. He also gets involved with a number of people in the ecumenical movement and attends some ecumenical conferences. One in particular, Reverend George Bell from England, becomes very important in his later on resistance work. Also in 31, he is appointed secretary for the World Alliance for Promoting International Friendship through the Churches. Again, it's an ecumenical movement in Germany. He chooses to be active in that and ends up being the youth secretary for that. He also taught confirmation. In the midst of this, he was asked by the church to teach a class of 50 young men, confirmation, in a working class / slum area in Berlin. Whoever their pastor was could not handle them, and they thought this young man with all this training could probably do a nice job, so they gave Bonhoeffer the job of teaching these 7th and 8th graders confirmation. He loved it. I guess the first couple classes were battles as to who would be in charge. Finally won the kids over, had just a great time with it. Loved the kids. This picture, the Bonhoeffers were wealthy enough, they had a summer retreat out in the forest somewhere. Took the kids on a number of trips there, did a lot with the kids. One of the interesting things about Bonhoeffer is he's very much an academic person. And he's rooted in academia. He never stays in academia. He's always got to get out into the real world and do things. So he's always trying a variety of different things. And this is him with some of the boys in the confirmation class. 31 through 32. He presents a series of lectures in Berlin that are published as Creation and Fall. Actually, again, is published form. 1933. Time to get into some world history. 1933. Hitler is now installed as Chancellor of Germany. This I pulled off the internet. It's actually, I think, from later on in the 30s. It's Hitler addressing the Reichstag. But officially in 33, Hitler comes to power. Bonhoeffer's education and all his early work is done in the turmoil that is post-World War I Germany. Bonhoeffer, actually, one of his older brothers, Walter, is killed in the First World War. Dies in the German army. Very hard on his family. Mother goes through a period of depression. Following the war, it's a rough time in Germany. They set up the Weimar Republic. Things do not go well. Germany is basically a mess. In the midst of all that, Hitler rises to power. Hitler comes to power, does some illegal things, finally gets elected as chancellor. The Bonhoeffer family is one of the first and one of the most astute to see the dangers in Hitler. They are not impressed by Hitler at all. The entire family, and again, it's kind of an aristocratic family. They see Hitler's shortcomings. They're not at all impressed by the Nazi movement. Bonhoeffer himself is not impressed. They also have an inside source. One of Dietrich's brother-in-laws, married to Dietrich's sister, was a man named Hans Donnerheim. And he was a member of the military's secret police, the military intelligence. And so he was up on all that Hitler was doing. And so in this period, as Hitler's coming to power, the official word is Hitler is restoring the honor of Germany and rectifying a lot of wrongs. And some of the propaganda is very, very attractive. The Bonhoeffer family knows the inside stories. They know what he's doing behind the scenes. And so their opposition to Hitler starts very early on. One of the problems, I don't know if you were aware, one of the problems that Hitler had is he never totally won over the German aristocracy or the German military. The German military never totally trusted Hitler. And the Germany has a long tradition of kind of aristocratic rulers and Prussian nobility and some of that stuff. That class never really trusted Hitler either. Bonhoeffer's in the midst of all that. What happens is Hitler has always got to be a little careful that he doesn't antagonize the aristocracy and the military too much. And Bonhoeffer is able to play on that in his resistance. when Bonhoeffer does actively get involved in the resistance movement, he's able to play on some of that, some of those tensions that Hitler has to live with. Anyway, 1933, Hitler is elected chancellor. 2 days after Hitler is elected, Bonhoeffer's on Berlin radio saying this is not a good idea. He actually, what Bonhoeffer, Hitler claimed the title of Führer. You know, what is it, Der Führer? I had always thought that was the title that Hitler chose for himself. You know, I thought that was kind of Hitler's self-designation. The Führer is, of course, the leader. Found out in my research that actually Germany became such a mess after the First World War that this concept of a leader or a Führer arose before Hitler. And Germany decided they needed a Führer to lead them out of this mess and back into power and world statesmanship. Well, Hitler comes along, the title's there, he claims it. And Hitler very quickly, you know, takes over the title of Führer. In English, you can play with leader and misleader. You know, you can talk about somebody being a leader, or someone else might be a misleader. You can, you know, kind of play with the language. Bonhoeffer does that in German. The German allows the same thing, and he does Das Führer, and then I don't know how you say misleader in German. I wish Marlene Curry was here. She could tell me how to do that. But the same wordplay is available in German. So Bonhoeffer gets on Berlin radio and says Hitler is not a leader, he's going to be a misleader. And he's going to get the country in a whole lot of trouble. Bonhoeffer never finishes the address. It's cut off. There are two theories of thought as to what happened. The main theory is that the Nazis cut it off, that they did not appreciate someone denouncing Hitler, and so they cut him off mid-address. The other theory is that he simply got too long-winded. We do know it was a lengthy address and a very academic address. There are some historians who say he just went too long and his time was up and they cut him off. We're really not sure. Most stories are that the Nazis cut him off. Whatever happens, he's on the Nazis' radar screen. You know, Hitler's been in power for 2 days. Bonhoeffer has been noticed as a source of opposition. Also 1933, he is ordained. Also the same year he is ordained, he is now Reverend Bonhoeffer. 33, Hitler is now in power and begins doing some things. In April of that year, the Aryan Civil Service legislation is passed, bars Jews from public employment. What will happen now is Hitler will get stricter and stricter and stricter on the Jews. As he's in power, that pressure will just get more and more severe. Hitler also decides that Germany needs a national church. Prior to Hitler, there was no state church in Germany. There were all sorts of regional churches. Hitler comes to power and says, that's silly, let's consolidate. One, to make sense, let's just have one national church body. And Hitler's hope is that he can Nazify the church. That besides making sense, he can also use the church to back up his Nazi philosophy, which he does. He forms a national right church. Fairly successful in that, always some opposition to that. And the right church works very hard to Nazify the Christian religion. Most of the Old Testament is ignored, it's too Jewish. The New Testament is interpreted in light of more accurate Nazi teachings. It's not so much an overall rejection of Scripture, it's just kind of a rewriting and a refocusing. Hitler sets out to do that. He appoints a man named Ludwig Müller as the First Reich bishop. Bonhoeffer can't stand the man, thinks he's an idiot, so they don't get to be close. Also in that year, the Pope signs a concordat with Hitler, basically saying Hitler will stay out of his affairs and we'll stay out of your affairs. What most of the churches did with Hitler is basically come to an agreement that says we as a church, our job is to tell people that they're sinners and then proclaim forgiveness of sins. And we'll do that, you let us do that, and Hitler, you can have the rest. And Hitler was very happy with that. The church, you do your stuff, you know, as much as you want, you proclaim, you know, that everybody's a sinner, and you tell them that you know, they are forgiven, and that's fine, and stay out of politics. And most of the churches, at least initially, make their peace with Hitler by doing that. The Catholic Church also does that. By the time they realize that's a mistake, it's too late. It's too late. So Hitler's consolidating power in Germany. A year later, in 1934, the Confessing Church is organized. And it is a movement among church people saying, we're not going to go with this right church. We're going to be faithful. We are not going to Nazify the Bible. The Bible alone is the Word of God. The Bible is the sole foundation for the church. Also, the head of the church is Jesus Christ, not the cure. And so the confessing church is organized. Bonhoeffer is one of the leaders in doing it. 1934, they begin that. They stand in opposition over to the right church. Initially, they're not real sure where Hitler stands in all this. In fact, there was actually some conversation that if they could appeal to Hitler directly, that he would, allow churches to get back to being faithful. And of course, that wasn't the case for the benefit of hindsight. But the confessing church now begins in Germany, and Bonhoeffer is part of that. Also in that year, Bonhoeffer leaves for England. Leaves Germany, goes to England, and serves a congregation of Germans over in England. Number of reasons for doing that. One, he's starting to get worried about being drafted. Germany is beginning to build up its army. Also, he realizes his job is in danger. All civil employees, which a teacher at the University of Berlin was required to sign an oath of loyalty to Hitler. Bonhoeffer was unwilling to do that. And the Nazis are starting to crack down on the ability to protest. And so Bonhoeffer looks at all that, decides to go to England. The other advantage of going to England is it gives him more freedom of communication, more freedom to protest what's going on in Germany. So he goes to England. Actually, is back and forth all the time. He's in London, he's in Berlin. So back and forth very much between the two. Also in 1934, German President Paul von Hindenburg died. Hindenburg is really the last check against Hitler. I don't know if you remember from history, Hindenburg, war hero in World War I for Germany, was actually president when Hitler's named chancellor. He provides some balance to the Nazis. When Hindenburg dies, Hitler takes over, declares himself chancellor and president, and now really there's no stopping. Next year, 1935, Bonhoeffer returns from England. The confessing church decides that it needs a seminary. If you're going to survive as a church body, you have to have a seminary to train pastors. And so Bonhoeffer is invited to come back and run the seminary. And so a year later, he comes back. They set up a seminary. They start in Zeitz, Germany. They very quickly move to Finkenwald. And the seminary lasts for about 3 years. By 1938, it really is functionally over. But he comes and sets up a seminary in Finkenwald. Struggles with what a seminary education looked like and wrestles with that. And he realizes pastors of the time are, and I guess I would add pastors of our time, and I'll include myself in the bunch, tend to get out of seminary very well educated in academia and theology, and are very weak in common sense and lives of faith. And I can say that as a self-confession. The German model for education, and actually still a model in our country, is seminaries, graduate school. You come out as very astute theologians, but always not so deep. I remember one of our professors when we graduated looked at our class and said, "You have thorough academic background. You are babes when it comes to faith, and I hope you have the good sense to learn from the members of your congregation." Oh yeah. Bonhoeffer realized the same thing, and so his model is very academic. I mean, he wants students to know the best of theology. It's also an experiment in faith building, and so he draws from all the classical traditions of the church. The students have assigned prayer times. They fast. They meditate on Scripture. It very intentionally is both an academic model of learning theology and formation in faith. And it's a fascinating model. It actually, Bonhoeffer writes all this in his book, Life Together. And I'll show you a copy of that before we get done tonight. But Life Together is Bonhoeffer's reflecting on the time at Finkenwald. Fascinating book. Absolutely a lot of fun. Forms a seminary. They last for about 3 years. They form, by December of the first year they form, Himmler, one of the Nazis, has declared the confessing church invalid, and therefore the seminary is illegal. So the seminary does not establish long before it's declared to be illegal. Bonhoeffer is able to finagle to keep things going. He's got enough connections. He's able to keep the seminary going for a number of years. There are also a number of people who support him very well financially. There's a rich widow, elderly woman in the area named Ruth von Kleist, I believe is her name. and she becomes a strong supporter of Bonhoeffer, and she will re-enter his life later, so I'll sneak her name in now. But they have the seminary going. They're very quickly declared illegal. September of that year, the Nuremberg laws are passed canceling citizenship for all Jews. And so again, there's a tightening up with the Jews. Bonhoeffer is one of the first to realize that that is totally unacceptable. That most of the Christians are willing to ignore that. Bonhoeffer says, no, that you can't do that. In fact, he's got a famous quote where he says, "You have no right to sing Gregorian unless you're willing to shout for the Jews." Do we have any church musicians in here? You know what Gregorian is?
Yeah, chant.
It's chant. It's high, beautiful, the church will chant. And what Bonhoeffer was basically saying is you have no right to worship. Don't come to God to praise and worship God unless you're willing to stand with these Jews who are being persecuted. Powerful statement. Doesn't gain him any grace with the Nazis, obviously. But as there's more and more persecution going on, Bonhoeffer says, no, that's impossible. Or it's possible, it's not right. Also at Finkenwalde, Bonhoeffer meets Eberhard Bethge, who becomes his closest friend and confidant. Extremely close friend. They actually room together at Finkenwalde. Very, very good friend. They have stories in their later letters of sitting up all night smoking cigars, talking theology until the wee morning hours. Bethge becomes Bonhoeffer's sounding board. Bethge actually marries Bonhoeffer's niece, Renata, and literally becomes part of the Bonhoeffer family. Close relation. Bethge becomes significant. Bonhoeffer smuggled a lot of letters out of prison, which contained some of his more advanced theology. Most of those were written to Bethge. Bethge preserved all that. After the war, after Bonhoeffer's death, Bethge is the one that pulled all that together. He pulled all the notes from Bonhoeffer's materials together and published them and had them shared in a way that people could understand what Bonhoeffer was about. So Bethge really became the one who introduced Bonhoeffer to the post-World War II world. Bethge died, I think, about 2000. It's been a number of years now. 36, just a couple of things. Confessing Church leader Martin Niemöller is arrested. One of the leaders in the Confessing Church was a World War I hero named Martin Niemöller. After the war, he's become a pastor and got very active with the Confessing Church. Renowned German World War I hero. He was actually a submarine commander and was awarded 2 Iron Crosses. You know, the Iron Cross is, I think, the German equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. Niemöller gets 2 of them. And he's one of their leading war heroes. As Hitler comes to power, he sees the danger of Hitler. And he begins a much more public critique of Hitler. He gets involved with the Confessing Church. He's much more vocal than Bonhoeffer is. Niemöller is finally arrested very early on, 36, on personal orders of Hitler, and thrown into a concentration camp where he stays for the rest of the war. He does survive the war, but he is very quickly put into a concentration camp. What's interesting is some of the maneuvering that Bonhoeffer and others do. They're able to maneuver with the Nazis. Bonhoeffer has some letters with Niemöller, and their conversation is, well, if Niemöller volunteers for the Navy again, I mean, at this point, everybody knows war is imminent. If he volunteers to serve in the Navy again, how can the Nazis say no? You know, one of your big war heroes wants to get back in the service. You got to let him. Well, instead of rotting out the war in a concentration camp, get in the Navy. And I mean, they're doing all this scheming and finagling. And Niemöller finally refuses. He won't sign a loyalty oath to Hitler. And it's questionable if the Nazis would have let him out anyway. But some interesting shenanigans behind the scenes. Also in 36, Bonhoeffer's authorization to teach at Berlin is withdrawn. He no longer is allowed to teach. 37, the next year, Finkenwalde is now closed by the Gestapo. The Gestapo, they're able, through maneuvering, to keep it open for a couple of years. In 37, the Gestapo says enough is enough, and they come in and they close the place down. 27 pastors, former students, are arrested. Most of them end up in the war. Very few of the Finkenwalde students survived the war. I mean, they're young men. Most of them were arrested and then moved right into the military. And so with very few of Bonhoeffer students actually survived. The seminary, after it's closed by the Gestapo, sort of operates for another year. Bonhoeffer farms students out to parishes, to congregations that are sympathetic to what they're trying to do, and he stays in contact with them. and kind of becomes a little bit of a circuit preacher driving around. So they keep an operation kind of through a 1938, but functionally they're closed. They're done. November of that year, Bonhoeffer publishes The Cost of Discipleship, one of his outstanding books. It's a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. Beautiful, beautiful. We're going to talk about that in some depth next week. Fascinating book. Also in 37, Pope Pius realizes he didn't make a good decision in reaching an agreement with Hitler, and so the Catholics begin protesting their earlier agreement.
What way did Hitler infringe upon the agreement?
With the Catholics, I'm not sure. I would say with the Catholics, I'm not sure. My hunch is some of the Catholics probably got active with the Jewish situation, and probably began to make some noise, and any help rendered like that. I think the Catholic Church as a whole was fairly quiet, but there's stories of some of the nuns and priests and stuff hiding Jewish people and smuggling people out of the country and some of that. Other questions? I'm doing a whole lot of talking, giving you a whole lot of material here.
That's more.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil anything, but I know you had a son when you met.
Bethke? Yeah. Yeah, I met Bethke when I was in seminary. Yeah. Very enjoyable evening. A lot of fun. That's a whole other story. But it's you have to tell that someone, of course. But met both Bethke and Renate, his wife, Bonhoeffer's niece, and it was a whole lot. In fact, what was intriguing to me is a couple of our students were serving as waiters at a dinner. Bethke was there. All the theologians were in the other room, and Bethke comes back and hangs around with us. I'm going, wow, this is a theologian I can relate to. You know? Yeah. 1938. Bonhoeffer makes his first connection with the resistance. He's starting to realize that simply protesting against Hitler is not going to be enough. Makes some initial contacts with the German resistance. September, he writes Life Together, which is a short book. And if you get a chance, it's an easy read. It's a short book. It's a summary of their life at Finkenwalde and what they tried to do at the seminary. And it really is a devotional classic. It's a lot of very, very nice book. Also in 38, Bonhoeffer's sister Sabine, his twin sister, was married. They called him a Jewish husband, and actually the man was Christian. He was his father was full-blooded Jew, and his mother was not. So he was actually by nationality half Jewish. He was baptized as a Christian. His family was Christian. Nonetheless, because he had Jewish blood, he was Jewish. By this point, the persecution of the Jews is getting pretty severe. And so they sneak Sabine and her husband and 2 daughters to Switzerland. Actually, Bonhoeffer and Bethke drive them. It's one of these middle of the nights, hoping they don't get caught by any guards, get across the Swiss border and drop her off. And she moves from Switzerland, then over to England, where she stays for the rest of the war. In April of that year, all German pastors are ordered to take an oath of allegiance to Hitler in recognition of his 50th birthday. And so Bonhoeffer is not too hot on this whole Nazi thing. Anyway, now what do you do? And then the question becomes, pastors, do you want to be employed? Well, one, do you want to be employed? And two, do you want to stay out of concentration camps? And so another dilemma, what do you do with that? Also, November is when the Kristallnacht takes place. It was the night of rioting where they tried to destroy so much of Judaism. In Germany, they 7,000 Jewish-owned shops are sacked, synagogues are burned, 30,000 Jewish men are arrested. It's all orchestrated by the Nazis. Big night for them.
How has Bonhoeffer avoided arrest by 1938 or up until then?
He was slick. He was slick and had family connections. Without his family connections, I don't think he would have made it until 38. He's already made enough noise. The Germans are a little bit nervous. The Nazis are a little bit nervous about some of these aristocratic families. They've got a lot of power, and Hitler can't afford to alienate them. And so Bonhoeffer's able to maneuver that. But if you notice, the Nazis are getting stricter and stricter. The other problem he's got is he's awfully close to getting drafted. I mean, he's a young man. Everybody knows war is imminent. He's doing a whole lot of maneuvering to try to stay out of the army.
Mark?
Yeah.
There's a man, I don't think he's an admiral, a general named Canaris,
Yes.
and appointed Bonhoeffer to the Admiral,
Yep.
which is like
Yep.
the FBI or the,
Yep.
and that really enabled him to, get back to your question, Nancy,
Yeah.
stay out
Yeah.
as much as he did.
Yep. Another year, he's going to end up in Germany in the military secret intelligence, and that enables him to, that gains him a lot of time. Yeah. Good. So things are getting worse. Worse in Germany.
Well, how,
Yes.
how did he avoid this,
Was it happening to the Jews?
That's right, yeah, about that, where they were, the pastors had to do the,
Sign the letter.
Yeah,
sign,
yeah.
how's he act,
Yeah,
I mean, did he just manage to get away with not doing that?
He's
Yeah.
fudging on it. I mean, he's trying to put it off as long as he can. He's not officially part of the right church. He's part of the confessing church, although the confessing church has still been illegal. So then he can claim, well, I'm not really a functional pastor. I'm a teacher at the University of Berlin. But he's been relieved of those responsibilities. And so, he's maneuvered a lot.
Yeah.
But the walls are narrowing. The walls are narrowing. He doesn't have a whole lot of room to maneuver anymore. And so all that comes to a head, 1939, not sure what he's going to do, comes back to the United States. And what's going on is he's getting tied in but he can't teach. He's very quickly is forbidden from public speaking and writing. If he's going to stay in the church, he's got to make his friends with the Nazis and swear allegiance to Hitler. Doesn't want to do that. He knows he's in danger of being drafted. It's amazing that he hasn't been drafted into the army already. And actually, interesting, he wrestles with that. And there are some sermons he gives where he sounds like a complete pacifist, where he is just, any fighting is wrong. There's other passages where he talks about going into the military. In fact, in his letters from prison, Bethke is already drafted into the military, and he wonders if they can pull some strings and end up in the same outfit. As long as we got to go through this war, let's at least go through it together. And so he has a sense, as a good German, that he may have a responsibility to his country to serve in the military. The military also has to take a loyalty oath to Hitler. If you're in the military, you do not swear allegiance to Germany, you swear allegiance to Adolf Hitler. And he refuses to do that. He thinks that is quite unacceptable. So, 39, not sure what to do, heads back to the United States. He's in contact with some of the theologians at Union Seminary that he had met on his previous trip there. Doesn't know what to do. The theologians from the United States say, come on over here, ride out the war with us. Just get out of Germany. You're going to end up, whatever's going to happen is not going to be good. Come over here. We'll set up a teaching position for you. You can teach at the Union Seminary. Ride out the war here. You've got the freedom to protest or to do whatever you need to do. Come over here. Bonhoeffer agrees. June of 1939, comes over to the United States. He's here for about a month. Stays for about a month and realizes it's a mistake. Realizes that he made the wrong decision. He writes a famous letter. We don't have the letter anymore, but there a great Lutheran theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, was also teaching at Union Seminary, very influential in getting Bonhoeffer over here. And Bonhoeffer writes to him, and basically what he says, I cannot share in the rebuilding of my country if I don't share in her destruction. He knows war is going to come. He's convinced Germany is going to be defeated. But his thought is, if I don't share in the destruction of my country, I'm going to have no right to share in her rebuilding. The other intriguing one that fascinates me is, put yourself in the issue. What do you do? He's very actively praying that Germany will be defeated. He comes to the conclusion, war is inevitable. If Germany wins, Western civilization as we know it is over. Germany has to lose. How do you pray for your own? And he literally struggles with that in some of his writings. He's in prayer that when the war breaks out, we lose. That's just tough stuff. How do you wander your way through that? Finally, United States realizes he made a mistake, catches the last steamer back across the Atlantic, goes back to Germany. Now he's in Germany. January 1st, the Nazis continue to put the pressure on the Jews, and September 1st, 1939, war begins. Germany invades Poland, and the war is now official. 1940, the next year, Bonhoeffer is back in Germany, but he is forbidden to speak in public and required to report regularly to the police. As you mentioned, the Nazis have a sense this guy is not on our side. And so they're boxing him in every way they can. He's required to report regularly to the police, spends a couple of months working on the ethics. One of his goals in life was to write a book on ethics. Doesn't survive to do that. Works on that. April 9th, Germany invades Denmark. It's interesting, at the height of Hitler's power, 1940, Hitler has, taken most of Europe. He defeated France. Looks like they're going to get Britain. Hitler's at the height of his power. And Bonhoeffer is one of the few in Germany that's saying this is not good. This is not a good thing. 1940 makes a very important move. He joins the Abwehr, which is Germany's military intelligence. One of Bonhoeffer's brother-in-laws, Hans Donahue, is an active member of the Abwehr. German military. In our country we have the CIA and the FBI. We've got a number of spy organizations like that. Spy organization is the wrong word. We've got we've got a number of there's a number of organizations that what's that? Intelligence. Thank you. Much better word. A number of intelligence services. Germany had the same. The Gestapo was the official arm of the Nazi Party. The Abwehr was the official arm of the military. They did not like each other, and they didn't trust each other. The Abwehr actually becomes the center of a lot of the resistance movement of the Nazis that goes on in Germany. But they're both there. Bonhoeffer's brother-in-law, very active. Admiral Karnitz, I'm going to get his name, my German is off. It works closely with Bonhoeffer's brother-in-law, wants to get Bonhoeffer in. The idea, he joins the German military intelligence with the idea that he knows enough church people abroad that he can be a great asset to Germany. That he knows church people in Switzerland, Sweden, all these other places. He can go abroad and he can argue the case of Nazi Germany for Nazi Germany. So he signs up and says, sure, really ends up being a double agent. Officially, he's on the Abwehr's payroll. He's there to argue the Nazis' cause. And then at night, he meets with everybody secretly and says, here's what's really going on. Here's what the Nazis are doing. Please get the word out. And there is resistance in Germany to Hitler. Please get the word out of it. Please get some word out that there is resistance to Hitler going on in Germany. It's a brilliant move on Bonhoeffer's part. Number one, it keeps him out of the army. I mean, they can't draft him. He's already in the military. So it keeps him from getting drafted. He's able to use his church contacts, and he's able to now enter the resistance. He will find a very active role in the resistance. But it has a downside. It leaves Bonhoeffer virtually alone. The confessing church that he has loved and nurtured now thinks he's a traitor. Things got tough, he gave up on us. He not only shut up, he joined the Nazis. Up to this point, he's making a whole lot of public protests. Well, if you're in a resistance underground movement, you don't want to call attention to yourself, so he shuts up. And the confessing churches, he sold out. He joined in the German military machine. And so the confessing church that he knows and loves doesn't know what to do with him. A lot of the theologians that he is connected with in Germany and across Europe now think he's a turncoat. And so he loses all of his church connections. The Nazis aren't big on him anyway. He loses everything. The only connections he still has is his family, which he's extremely close to, and the other members of the resistance. But everybody else thinks he's done the worst. It's interesting in some of his writings. He writes how in the final analysis we have to stand before God alone and account for our lives. I think, yeah, he did.
What about Becca?
He ended up in the army. He was
But did you think the same thing about?
no. Bethke actually was part of the resistance. Bethke was actually part of the resistance. After Bonhoeffer gets arrested a year from now, they don't catch on to Bethke. He's in the army, and there was actually a failed attempt on Hitler. And after that, the Nazis cracked down. They figure out that Bethke was part of it. He's arrested from the army, thrown in a concentration camp. He's still alive when the Russians liberate him. So he actually does end up in jail also. But for most of it, he's serving in Italy. So, Bonhoeffer is now in the Secret Service. 1941. Bonhoeffer is now forbidden to print or to publish, even though he's in the Obbar. The Nazis don't trust him. He makes 2 trips to Switzerland on behalf of the resistance. That's actually incorrect. He officially goes to Switzerland on behalf of the Obbar. He's there for official purposes. He uses it to connect with the resistance. Also in June of 41, Germany now invades Russia. They begin deportation to the Jews, and the gas chambers are now installed and starting to be used. And December 7th, of course, the United States enters the war. So just to kind of give you the overall historical picture of that. 1942. Next year, he goes to Norway and Sweden, and again, he's officially on Obvar work. He is there to meet with people and tell them how good Nazi Germany is doing. Unofficially, he's working on behalf of the resistance. This George Bell, who he had met early in his career in the ecumenical movement, is now a bishop and a member of parliament. And so Bonhoeffer secretly meets with his own church buddy to tell him what's going on in Germany. Bonhoeffer's, the resistance movement decided that what they would do is assassinate Hitler and take over the government. The hope was to assassinate Hitler and then move very quickly, take over the power, and then as soon as they had control, they would try to make peace with the Allies. That they had to get Hitler out of the way, then they could make peace. Bonhoeffer's role in that was to use his connections to try to connect with the United States and England and let them know this resistance movement was going on. That there is a resistance movement in Germany. We would like for you to help. Please be aware of us, and if we do manage to kill Hitler, please be prepared to step in and help us. So Bonhoeffer's work is to make those connections. Bell is very valuable as a member of parliament. The bad news is neither the United States nor Britain want to work with him. Both FDR and Churchill said no, that the war against Germany has to be unconditional surrender. It's complete and total war. We don't want it. The Americans and the British thought that trying to negotiate with people in Germany would weaken the overall focus of the war. And so he does all this, and he's absolutely unsuccessful. That always makes me a little squeamish as an American. You can at least listen to him, but he meets with Bishop Bell again. And as a sideline, he gets engaged in the midst of all this. In 1943, he proposes and becomes engaged to Maria von Wiedemeyer. That is a picture of Maria. If she looks very young, she is very young. Bonhoeffer would have been, what, about 34, 35 when he proposes? She was 17. So she's a little bit, yeah, it's a little questionable. Remember I mentioned when Bonhoeffer was running the seminary at when Bonhoeffer was running the seminary at Finkenwalde, there was an elderly, rich, aristocratic lady named Ruth von Kleist. Very prominent, very rich, well-connected, didn't like Hitler at all. Supported Bonhoeffer, supported him in his arguments with the Nazis. Mrs. von Kleist had grandchildren, one of whom was Maria. While Bonhoeffer was at Finkenwalde, Mrs. von Kleist decided her grandchildren all needed to be confirmed. Who better to do this than this dashing young pastor who was teaching a seminary? So she basically tells Bonhoeffer, you're going to confirm my grandkids, which includes a couple of boys and Maria, who was 12 at the time. He actually flunks Maria. I doesn't think she's turned it out, and that becomes a bit of a bone of contention for them in later years. But they actually meet when she's 12. There's no romance at that time, so don't tell her. Bonhoeffer has on and off contact with the family over the years. As he's traveling, stays with them. Family very sympathetic to what he's trying to do. Finally, when he is 34, 35, she is 17. They get reacquainted, and the sparks fly, and they fall in love, and Bonhoeffer fairly quickly asks her to marry him. Needless to say, Maria's mom is not happy. I'm thinking if, well, my daughter is 18, if some 34 wanted to marry him, I don't care if he's a pastor, we're going to have a long conversation. Mom is not thrilled. Maria's father and brother have both died on the Eastern Front. They're both German. Her father was fairly high up in the officers. Both were killed on the Eastern Front. So it's a war hero family. It's a war hero family. They get engaged. Mom finally says, okay, you can be engaged, but keep it quiet for a year. keep it quiet for a year and no contact for a year. If you're really in love, you know, it'll work, and so you have a year fighting off period. And Mom finally agrees. So April of, was it April, no, you're right, 43, they are now engaged. Maria does survive the war. 1948, she comes over to this country. She actually becomes a very astute mathematician in her own right. Works for Honeywell and RAND, and is very influential in developing computers. Actually has a quite a remarkable career in this country. So she dies late 70s. I had a class on it. This is totally off the topic. I had a class in Bonhoeffer when I was in seminary, and Maria was still alive at the time, and the professor was Jim Burgess, who's very renowned Bonhoeffer scholar. He's the guy who did the finagling to get his bait gun. And at the time when Maria was alive, she had a collection of the letters between her and Dietrich that she did not want released until her death. Which is understandable. And I remember the professor saying, you know, I wish Maria no ill, but I sure wish she'd release those letters. she did die late 70s, and Renata would have been sister-in-law if they got married. Actually released the letters. They're called love letters from cell 92, and they really don't add any theology. I mean, it's just letters between Bonhoeffer and his fiancée. And you think about, I mean, good grief, you're engaged to somebody, don't give her theological lectures, you know, talk about other stuff. He was good there, didn't he? So, yeah. So they get engaged. They get engaged in January. In April of 43, Bonhoeffer is arrested, and he's put into Tegel prison. Now that is within, you know, they're 4 months into their engagement. They had decided that they would not announce their engagement for a year because of the mother's wishes. Maria is kind of a spunky young lady, and decides when Dietrich goes to jail, one way to tell the Nazis they don't have total control is to announce their engagement. You know, you may have control, but, you know, life goes on. And so as he gets in prison, they announce that they're engaged. I think for a 17 or 18-year-old, it's pretty spunky language. He is arrested. He is put into Tegel prison, and he is there for about a year and a half. That's a cell at Tegel prison. Don't know that was actually Bonhoeffer's cell, but you kind of get the flavor of it. And this is actually a picture from Tegel prison. Bonhoeffer's the one in the middle. 3 of them are Italian officers that had gotten arrested, and then a German officer with them. Now, when he's in Tegel, is a military prison, and it's not concentration camp. It's not a good place to be, but it's not a concentration camp. Initially, his initial treatment is harsh. They lock him in a cell. They throw breakfast. He describes as they throw a piece of bread in. And for sleeping, they give him a blanket that he said was too raunchy. He wouldn't even use it. Initially, it's pretty raunchy treatment, but that very quickly changes. First, he is very well connected. They realize he's a Bonhoeffer, and Bonhoeffer's mother's cousin is the commandant of Berlin. He's in charge of all defense of Berlin, and therefore in charge of a military prison. He makes a point of visiting Bonhoeffer very early on, and so the guards very quickly know that the presiding officer is related to this guy. And so the guards get the message that, you know, this is not a good person. No. If you're going to take things out of prisoners, this is not a good way to do it. The other thing he has going for him is he's there long enough, he really wins the respect of the guards. And he kind of doesn't do a lot of worship services, but kind of becomes pastor and counselor in residence for the inmates and the guards. And so earns their respect over the years. And actually is treated really fairly well at Tegel. According to official German policy, he was supposed to be able to write a letter every 10 days and receive a letter every 10 days. That lasts for about 2 weeks. And he begins to get the privilege of writing more and more. He also gets friends with some guards, and they begin smuggling letters back outside for him. The guards just take the letters, give them to the family. The family brings them back. Those letters have become letters and papers from prison. The Bonhoeffer book, Letters and Papers, are all the letters that were sent and smuggled out of Tegel prison. So he's in Tegel. It's a military prison. Interrogated regularly. They have no idea of the latest plot to get there, but he's done enough other stuff previously that they're watching him. So he's in Tegel. What else are we going to tell you about that? They're there for about a year and a half. The other, Maria, one Christmas, tries to smuggle him a Christmas tree. It's not conspiracy. She decides he needs a Christmas tree. She gets it into the jail. Bonhoeffer and the guards come out to get it. He looks at it and says, it's too big, for myself. And so they end up putting it in the guard station. And so he's in prison, this is, it's not a nice place to be. But he has a lot more freedom than your typical concentration camp. So he is in Tegel prison. Big event, July 20th, 1944, attempt at Hitler's life. The resistance now moves and tries to take Hitler out. The thought was that they would assassinate Hitler, and then they had some reserve forces organized. They were to move into all the Nazi headquarters, take over Europe, announce to the Allies that we surrender. And so July 20th, Klaus von Stauffenberger, there'd actually been a few previous attempts, none of them were at all successful. Stauffenberger is on Hitler's staff, and they have a meeting at Hitler's bunker, and Stauffenberger goes in with a bomb. And you've probably heard the story from World War II history. Carries the bomb in, takes his place very close to Hitler, has the bomb in a briefcase, puts the bomb down, stands there for part of the meeting, excuses himself and leaves. He actually leaves, gets on an airplane and flies out, sees the explosion, the bomb goes off. And he's convinced that Hitler's dead, so he sends out on radio, start the revolution, it's over. What happened, we think, is that they were gathered around a huge oak table, and the briefcase was probably in the way, and somebody to be a little more convenient, moved the briefcase out of the way, got it behind the leg of the table. And so when it blew, it made a mess. In fact, that's what the room looked like after the bomb. They were intent on killing Hitler. 3 people in the room were killed. Hitler's pants were burned off. Had 200 slivers in his body, blew out his eardrums. It was a very serious attempt, but it didn't work. He succeeded. Hitler survived, and they very quickly get Hitler on the radio saying this has been a minority trying to do something, and the movement is stopped. So July 20th, attempt at Hitler's life, doesn't succeed. After this, the Gestapo now cracks down. Now there's no grace. Now anybody, any connections, they're going to find it out. The Bonhoeffers initially hope Dietrich's been in jail. A lot of this planning is going on, and they figure maybe they'll overlook him. They don't. They don't. In October, his brother Klaus and another brother-in-law, Rudiger, are both arrested. Bonhoeffer is moved from Tegel prison to the Gestapo prison in Berlin, and now all niceties are off. Now he's in the hands of the Gestapo, and it is everything you've heard stories from World War II. No longer any niceties. Writes a couple of letters from the Gestapo prison. Most are form letters, and you can tell that it's written with someone looking over his shoulder. Moved to Gestapo prison. December 19th is the last letter that Maria receives. His parents get one a little bit later. April 3rd, he's moved around. The Allies are now closing in. War is just about over. Bonhoeffer and some other prisoners are being moved all over the place. Hitler has already decreed that anybody involved in that attempt will die. And so Bonhoeffer is moved around. He's in a place called Regensburg. And he actually, it's a Sunday, and he leads a worship service. He didn't do a lot of worship in church, in prison. Didn't do a lot of that. The people asked him if the other prisoners asked if he would lead a worship service. And so he does. Basically finishes the service, they're standing around, and 2 men in trench coats walk in and say, "Prisoner Bonhoeffer, come with us." And everybody knows what that means. It's the Gestapo. He's dead. There was a British officer that he'd gotten quite close to in the last days in these prisons. And as he walks by, he stops, shakes hands with the British officer, and says, "For me, this is the end and the beginning of life," and walks out the door with the Gestapo. That's the last we officially hear from him. He's taken to Flossenburg concentration camp. There's a bit of a kangaroo court in the middle of the night condemning him. The next morning, he's hung. He's hung along with 23 others. He's now hung. It's amazing. The war is over for all. And the Nazis are intent on executing all these people. They basically drive him 100 miles to give him a kangaroo court and execute him. That's nuts. So Bonhoeffer is hung. Just a little bit of perspective, March 9th, the Americans had actually crossed the Rhine. A week later, Hitler commits suicide after